investments, and really used to establish goals and actions that collectively add up to realizing the vision of the healthy and resilient landscapes. So just kind of a broad overview of what is that vision and strategic elements. And the next one we talked about how these two are working together is looking at the shared stewardship framework, really the governance and how we're looking at bringing that aspect of all of this together. Looking at the strategic leadership group, looking at the top there is really the executive level decision-making body. They provide direction and vision for the shared stewardship in Oregon and developing and implementing the 20-year strategic plan. It's important to note that it's comprised of federal and state agency leaders who have really committed to the goals of the MOU. And looking at who that current membership is the Oregon Department of Forestry State Forester, the director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Oregon Water Enhancement Board director, U.S. Forest Service Region 6 Regional Forester, the Natural Resource Conservation Service State Conservationist, the state director of the Bureau of Land Management, and the regional director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The next one I wanted to point out here is the Agency Coordination and Implementation Group. And they're really responsible for coordinating the development of the 20-year strategic plan and implementing the intentions of the MOU and Senate Bill 762. And it's really good to look at. This serves as the staff level hub for operationalizing shared stewardship across the federal and state agencies and ensuring engagement and cooperation with tribes, the stakeholders, and others. It's also really important to note too, within the structure, that we partnered with a diverse set of organizations to bring in outside strengths into development of strategy. One of them being American Forest has really been helping us develop and executing the process for the development of strategy. So a special thanks to American Forest for helping us out with that. In addition, partnering with the Institute of Natural Resources out of OSU, it's been helping us out with mapping products, scoping longer term decision support, and scientific input and support in the development of the strategy. Also good to recognize that partnering with OSU Fire Extension Program and really helping us better understand capacity and readiness in a regional engagement. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit as well. The survey that was sent out and future engagement with the partnerships and collaboratives. And then also the engagement with tribes, stakeholders, local collaboratives and partnerships really is how we advance and support implementation of these shared priorities and coordinated investments to achieve that vision of healthy and resilient landscapes. So that was really building the foundation. That was some necessary work to get where we are, and good work that happened. But what I also want to express was to really round out that phase one, building that foundation, as a framework document was created that was developed to essentially address how state and federal agencies plan to implement the directives and intentions of the MOU and Senate Bill 762. Something good to note that framework document can be found on the 20-year strategy webpage under the resources section. I believe that webpage was sent to you. So if you're interested in looking into that, that is on that webpage. Once that framework was developed, that really put us into the next phase, which is compiling the information. And that's really where we're going to start the next conversation here, the next information. So to look at this 20-year strategy, which is a very large look at the next 20 years, we wanted to break it out and look at work streams of how we're producing the strategy. And I want to hit on some of these key work streams in the next section here to let you all know where we are with that development in those. And really starting off with the first work stream, which is compiling priorities and goals from existing information. Starting this process, quick realization and a lot of good input. There's been a lot of good work that's been done and continues to happen. And we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We really want to build off of pre-existing plans. So looking at those statewide plans and how can we pull out that information, as you can see there, that really helps us understand compiling those goals from existing plans, capacity and readiness, the prioritization that feeds into the development of the strategy. In addition to that, assessing capacity and readiness. We fully understand that capacity barriers are one of the challenges with implementing large landscape scale projects. So trying to have a better understanding at a state scale of what is that capacity and that readiness to do this work. Also looking at how do we prioritize the restoration actions and geographies that was stated in the intentions of the MOU in Senate Bill 762. And then from there, you can see is really that red box in the middle of how do we look at what are those priority restoration actions and geographies, and what are those capacity and readiness needs. And that's really the heart of the strategy, which helps us develop what are our SMART goals, what's our financial implementation plan, what are our metrics and accountability, and how does that adaptive management loop over the next 20 years feed back into understanding the capacity and readiness, the prioritization, et cetera. And I think that's something that's really important to note is the process over the next 20 years. It's not a one and done. It's something that we need to be working on collectively over the next 20 years is really important to know. Also, it's as we pull this apart and as we talk about these individual pieces, really to complete the development of the strategy, this content's being produced, but it's going to be weaved back together to develop the final draft of the strategy. What I want to look at here is what we've really been focusing on for the last few months within phase 2, and going to dig a little bit deeper into some of these components. So that's the next part of our journey here together. We're going to talk about some of these aspects. So the first one is understanding capacity and readiness. And to implement the strategy, we really want to identify where conditions are in place for near-term implementation, while also identifying areas where conditions are not in place and what the gaps are. We really want to understand what those gaps are. And with this understanding, we can identify what are the needs, what needs to be done to create the necessary conditions for large-scale implementation. Something to note here is this assessment being completed through a combination of collecting both spatial data and also tabular data as well. A good example of that is where's our current NEPA cleared acres? It's good to understand that. Where are our current planning efforts? But also looking at a better understanding of the many local regional partnerships and collaboratives that work at a landscape scale and do this resiliency and wildfire risk reduction work. And with that too is kind of looking at a multiple approach here. The first one's an online survey. EJ Davis with OSU had sent out that survey to you all. And hopefully this is providing a little more context to that survey, but really appreciate that time to fill that out. And really with that survey that was sent to you all is we're seeking to learn about the local and regional partnerships and collaboratives and that are engaged in this work, and recognize what are the differences and how is this all taking place, understanding the diverse ecological context throughout the state. And just a reminder on that survey closes on the 23rd, so in a few days, and really the participation in that survey is greatly appreciated, and that information is going to come back and help us shape what are the capacity and readiness needs within the strategy. Also within that survey, looking at a follow-up and obtain more information. So an opportunity to discuss that in deeper detail. And then something that's really important to note too is development of a long-term engagement plan. Oh, excuse me. Development of a longer-term engagement plan with the local and regional perspectives that can continually inform the development and the adaptation of the strategy. And going back to that Workstreams look that we had there of constantly engaging with the partnerships and collaboratives to understand what are those capacity barriers and needs, and how do we address that over the next 20 years. So really an important aspect that we're trying to figure out here. The next piece I want to jump into, we talked about capacity and readiness, but I also want to jump into what is the prioritization aspect of this. Once again, going to that original language there, it talks about a 20-year strategic plan that prioritizes restoration actions and geographies for wildfire risk reduction. Additionally, in that MOU, We talk about priority treatment areas, using values at risk and scenario planning. So I want to jump into the next aspects of prioritization, which is a big component of the strategy here. So once again, some language from Senate Bill 762. Really identifying strategic landscapes that are ready for treatment, and giving priority to projects within the landscapes that are. Senate Bill 762 lays out the 4 highest EMBC classes within the quantitative wildfire risk assessment. And we'll look at that here in just a minute. In addition, treatment projects currently under NEPA, and then focusing on projects that protective of human life, property, critical infrastructure, watershed health, forest and rangeland habitat restoration. And this part D here, I think, is really important, is part of a collaborative partnership. And once again, is understanding within these partnerships and collaboratives, where's that readiness and where are those barriers, I think is a key component working over the next 20 years. So I just wanted to point out some of the direction from Senate Bill 762 within selecting and administering projects through Senate Bill 762. Within the prioritization needs assessments, I just wanted to kind of go through what is the thought process of how we're looking at this prioritization needs assessment. So the approach that we really looked at in early conversations was developing a mechanism and process for prioritizing restoration actions and geographies. And once again, from that original language, always pulling that out. But we also want to build from existing data and decision support tools to identify near-term priorities. And then with that too, good conversations over the next 20 years that this is an ongoing process. We need to update those priorities. There's new data, additional information, and then also alignment with updates and decision support tools and feedback is really important as well. And with that, looking at a longer term decision support and longer term priorities. So really looking at a two-pronged approach here with a short term and then also looking at the long term. And then also, as we looked at within that language, within the MOU and Senate Bill 762, the criteria of wildfire risk really laid it out. Also looking at the restoration need, at those restoration actions. And then we know it's really important to look at the social and the economic needs. And then also a key component here is the proximity to existing or recent resiliency work. Building off of all the great work that's been happening is really critical, and how do we increase pace and scale from the work that's already happening is really an important aspect of the strategy. Once again, just to kind of look at what was the next pieces of this, which is that short term or the near term prioritization needs assessment, and then also a longer term. So just really want to express the two approaches that we're looking at over the next 20 years, and then identifying those priorities. So here, just a real quick overview of longer term decision support for prioritization. To reiterate some of the conversations here is that those initial geographic and action priorities really reflect a snapshot in time. We know that they're going to evolve. Treatments and restoration work is going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. We're going to have future wildfires. We know that it's going to happen. And how do we incorporate that? New information. There's updates to the QWRA. There's updates to other models. We know climate change is here and in front of us, and there's still a lot to learn there. Capacity and readiness challenges. We've hit that quite a bit, but that's going to evolve over time as well. We know there's demographic shifts, and then also social values evolve over time as well. So really identifying that things shift, things change over time, and it's important for the strategy to bring those changes in and look more longer term than just a short static look at all of this. And then also that the discussions of the agencies benefiting from a shared platform. How do we track these changes and support decision making? Really building off the initial data and the maps, and also could support some type of dashboard, looking at what are our monitoring and accountability, and what have we been accomplishing? Are we getting to our goals that we're looking to achieve over the long term? So just really wanted to express that longer term decision support and start with that. But really the question is where are we looking at prioritizing over the next 1 to 3 years? That's that short-term prioritization. What I want to show here is really just beginning conversations in direction from Senate Bill 762 and the MOU. Really brought us to look at the overall wildfire risk from the 2018 Pacific Northwest Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessment, and also looking at that forest disturbance restoration need outlined in the expanding our understanding of forest structural restoration needs in the Pacific Northwest. So really a kind of beginning look, and what I really want to express is these are not solid maps. This is not the answer. We just really want to inform everyone of the process that we're going through and the thought process, and really hope to have more information in the future. But we wanted to present some strong information of what we're looking at and kind of the journey that we're on, and how to incorporate feedback as we go down this journey. And something to look at here is, once again, this is simply a starting point. If we simply look at those two data sources and we look at high wildfire risk and restoration need, you can see that there is alignment with the fire history over the past 20 years that we showed at the very beginning of this. And this is really much work needs to be done from here, but just kind of a thought and just a start of where we're starting and how we need to refine this. In addition, if you were to look at that, some kind of important statistics here is you can see this represents over half the state, and it's 377 million total acres. We're also missing key components such as climate change, social and environmental justice, milling infrastructure, past accomplishments and current priorities and planning, and then also that collaborative capacity to increase pace and scale. These conversations are constantly ongoing and continuing to dig into that, but just kind of a snapshot and a very beginning look at where we are in this process. In addition to that, I'm starting to pull out some of the data from these sources. Once again, for wildfire risk, using the overall wildfire risk layer from the Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessment, also known as the Expected Net Value Change, or the ENVC. And really two ways to summarize this wildfire risk values at the watershed scale. We can sum it values within the watershed, or we can take the average of the values in the watershed. And this is work that we still need to dig into and fully understand. And also this map compares those 4 highest classes of the ENVC, and the values are summarized in dark purple, and the mean is used in the crosshatched. And also please note, this is data from 2018, and the QWRA is currently going through an update process, and we hope to use this new data in the future. So just wanted to a quick look at some of the data that we're looking at here, and once again, that very preliminary conversations of how we're digging deeper into this. In addition to that, understanding what are the forest restoration needs. And we're using data from the 2018 DeMayo et al. Publication, which is expanding our understanding of forest structural restoration need in the Pacific Northwest. And really identified the transitions needed to shift from forest structure to a more resilient natural range of variation. This map also shows the percent of watersheds that require disturbance-based restoration to return to a natural range of variation. The data here is a map includes transitions in the table on the right that are disturbance only, or disturbance then succession. And also the percent of the watershed needing succession only to return to the natural range of variation is an important consideration when planning activities, but not included in this map, since really the goal here is to identify and prioritize geographies for active treatments. So once again, just preliminary conversations and working with the folks who are developing this data to further understand it. And it's key to note that there's still lots of work here as well. And then also, when you look at that original data sets, is identified that it doesn't represent the range component, which is key in Senate Bill 762 as well. And just some notes here is working with the SageCom partnership and to select what are the data sets to use to identify those rangeland restoration needs. And this is just one possible approach under consideration. And once again, we just really want to express to you all that a lot of work to do here, but kind of where our thinking is and where we're thinking about going, and feedback's really important as well. So within this as well is the sagebrush conservation design geographic strategy really mapped out the core sagebrush areas for proactive management that could be most effective, and really bringing that into this overall strategy. So I want to just express that we're looking at this data set as well, moving into the future. So that was just kind of a real quick overview of some of the mapping and looking to have more information here in the future, but also wanted to jump into part of this overall strategy is also looking at what are the overall restoration actions as well. So right here is looking at from that agency coordination and implementation group, that ASIG, just some how we're thinking about these investments. And you can see about the restoration projects in Senate Bill 762, G&A and the Federal Forest Restoration Program, the FIPS program through OWEB, and also looking at habitat restoration priorities and landscape mitigation opportunities, and also our planning processes, NEPA, 5-year planning process, also looking at agency planning process through county long-range plans, and really developing new conservation implementation strategies. But really, I think the key thing to look at here is at the bottom, that the conversations that we're having within this agency coordination group is really collectively is how are we coordinating these actions and investments? And that's a huge component to the development and the implementation of the strategy, is bringing in those coordinated actions and investments over the long term. And then here's jumping into our priority actions. Like I had mentioned earlier, there's the priority actions and geographies, and how are we looking at the priority actions that this plan is looking at supporting? And once again, just some preliminary conversations and options for types of actions. And going back to that, really building that local capacity, the local groups, the tribes, the agencies, the workforce. We know that's a critical component over the next 20 years, and really need to think about building that capacity over the next 20 years. Also the engagement, right? How are we all engaging together, working together? How are we building social license to do this work? I think that's very important as well. And then also our planning. We know that planning can be a barrier into doing the work, and looking at NEPA planning and management plans. And with that too is moving into our implementation. Mechanical, controlled burns, managed fire, and maintenance is also really important over the longer term. And also looking at utilization and milling infrastructure and monitoring, and how are we, as we discussed earlier, developing decision support to help us make the adequate decisions over the next 20 years. And understanding what's our current funding and what are our new funding mechanisms that we need to look at. How do we bring in increased funding over the next 20 years is a key component. And just some important notes here too is, as we've kind of expressed in previous slides, is looking at the difference between forest versus range, and also public lands versus private lands versus tribal lands. Still having those conversations. And then also, how are we addressing equity? We know that's a very large component, and digging deeper into how are we going to address equity within the overall strategy. So once again, we looked at just kind of preliminary information, and then also within our priority actions, what's that preliminary information that we're looking at here. So pulling information together, and also want to look at starting to get into phase 3, moving into January. And that's the drafting of the plan, and really starting to bring all this information together. There's a lot out there, and there's been a lot of good work, but starting to weave all of these work streams together to draft the plan. And that's really where we're going into the future, which is the next phase of this. So once again, going back to our work streams graphic that we showed of how are we producing this strategy. And we've talked about kind of the beginning, and now we're going to look into what is the future here. And that's starting to bring all of this together, starting to produce those goals, the financial implementation plan, and the metrics and accountability aspect of it. So looking into that phase 3 of the strategy development. So once again, the language that we saw at the very beginning that we talked about, but I want to just look at the last part of it. It talks about direct federal, state, and private investments. And that's part of the strategy, is looking at what are the priority geographies and how are we directing them. And also in preliminary conversations we've had is Maybe we're looking more at guiding instead of directing. I think that's something important to note too, is leadership's looking at how are we guiding these investments over the next 20 years. So digging into that, looking at the financial implementation plan, kind of 4 steps here, really identifying existing funding sources, the programs, the authorities, and pulling that together. And once again, collective, not an individual organization, agency, but collectively, how are we pulling in those funding sources? And then identifying new opportunities that we don't know about or that we can bring in to help support all of this work. And that's a key component of it as well. And then moving into the bottom 2 parts of it is how are we linking these funding sources and new funding sources to our priorities, our capacity and readiness, our goals. That's a very huge component here is we want to understand this information, but how are we going to get past those barriers by linking those funding sources appropriately and really coordinating those investments and those actions is going to be critical here in the future. And then also engaging with our federal and state partners and integrating those shared priorities and goals into funding programs and activities. So kind of our step process of what we're looking at for how are we directing or guiding this funding here into the future. So kind of starting off with what are some of those initial funding sources, kind of at a large level, kind of a list here of some funding sources that we've started to compile and how we can collectively think about utilizing these assets and these resources appropriately, understanding what are our goals and what are our needs into the future. I believe you all are very familiar with some of these programs and just kind of a list of what they are, anywhere from our landscape resiliency program that was developed as part of Senate Bill 762 and has seen some great success and continuing that program into the future, and also our federal forest restoration program, the great success that's been in there and continuing to move that forward as well. We have competitive grants, we have the OWEB grant programs, and then also some of our federal sources of the larger grant programs or funding sources, and looking at within this strategy and this governance structure, how are we adequately placing these funding sources in the right places to meet our goals, our capacity needs, et cetera. So, and then also something to note at the bottom there is exploring conservation finance, other funding sources that we as the agencies may not be the best at, and trying to bring in some additional partners and thinking about how do we bring additional funding sources into the overall strategy. So just once again, kind of a quick overview, a quick look at what was the funding sources that we're looking at within the strategy. And what I also want to express here too is looking at what is our timeline for phase 3. We're moving into that, time's moving quickly. And just kind of a rough idea of what we're looking at for phase 3 and starting to bring this together and also continuing to develop it over the next couple months. We've got some key presentations we're going to be looking at, and then also starting to bring some of this information to folks to look at and start getting some feedback on the drafts, and then moving those into revised reports with a goal of a final report really endorsed by the strategic leadership group in June, and then released to begin implementation. And one thing I do want to express, like I had mentioned earlier, is starting to plan a more robust regional engagement strategy paired with future informational presentations. Really hope that you all see value in this conversation and getting information on kind of where we are, and want to continue that into the future, but also more robust engagement and deeper conversations with y'all of kind of the development of the strategy and moving into the future, and then continuing that longer term engagement over the next 20 years. I think it's going to be critical to tie in our governance and our 20-year strategy here. And then just once again, I wanted to look at this timeline. We've kind of come down this journey of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And something that's really important is to implement the plan, and still working on the implementation of it. But as we draft it, knowing that, hey, we're going into implementation, and lots of early conversations that not just another shelf document, really want to make this something that we can implement over the next 20 years. So it's key to look at that implementation over the next 20 years. So That's really the last of the information. I just really want to express the opportunity to present. And once again, there's a lot of good work that's happening here. I have the opportunity to present this information. There's a lot of great folks that have really been working hard on where we are. And with that too, once again, I'll express there's a webpage that if you want more information, you can dig into that and additional resources and go from there. So I offer any questions, try to provide any answers, and we can see where we go and end in the next 15 minutes and go from there.
We currently have one question in the queue asking about posting a link to the survey. So maybe a little high level overview of who that survey was sent to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'll try to answer the best I can. There was a list of collective action groups, partnerships, and collaboratives that was sent to those groups. And with that, it's important to note that we didn't want to send it to everyone. We wanted to make sure that it went to kind of who's leading or overseeing that group or the collaborative or partnership. So we're not getting 20 or 30 responses from one group. We want to make sure that it's collective amongst everyone. So I'd ask that you work with who that director is or who that person guiding that and kind of gathering all that information together. So we're getting one response instead of multiple responses from that. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to reach out offline. I'd be happy to try to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Another question came in asking if the tribes were included on the survey.
No, the tribes were not included in the survey. That original survey went through the existing partnerships and collaboratives. But I think it's important to note too is with the tribal engagement, we've worked with our pre-existing channels and within early conversations, development of the strategy to stick with those pre-existing channels. And we've gone to the Legislative Commission on Indian Services and presented this information and through ODF, the Natural Resource Work Group and the Cultural Cluster, but also some additional information on the tribal engagements, working with our tribal liaisons to continue that engagement and look at that engagement long-term.
That's currently all the questions we have in the Q&A queue. Unless anyone has anything else, they can raise their hand and I can bring them in if they wanted to talk through anything.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. So what I'll offer, as always, is if there are additional questions or comments, always feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help answer those questions or find the right answers. Also, once again, just express that this is a work in progress. It's a 20-year strategy. It's a long-term and constantly working on improving and over this 20 years. So feedback's always really welcomed. I've always offered that. So feel free to reach out in that aspect. And also understanding that this is kind of beginning information, right? And a lot more work needs to be done, not only for the next 6 months, but for the next 20 years. I think that's a key aspect and we're constantly evolving. But I do strongly feel that we're taking a step in the right direction. I hope you all feel the same way. Once again, expressing some thoughts of if y'all see value in this, continue the conversations to present more information as we're learning and developing more information, and then a stronger, robust engagement over the next 6 months and into the future is really where we're going as well. So if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and finalize it, but just a special thank you to all the folks who have been working hard on this and really all the feedback we've gotten from you all, and look forward to the future and we'll talk to you soon. All right, thank you.